Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast we're going to be on. Today we spoke to an academic turned entrepreneur. This is Shamza Khan and her story. So thanks Shamsa for being on the podcast. It's an honor to have you with us today. Um, I'll give you the camera. Please start.
All right. I should check with you if you want the long version or the short version of
Any
who I
version is
am.
fine.
All right. So, I'm ethnically Pakistani and grew up in Hong Kong. Um, Hong Kong and Pakistan were two extremely different cultures,
Yes.
right? There's a first world country which works and is capitalist and everything's in order, but has no soul. And then there's Pakistan, which is extremely dysfunctional, but passionate and soulful. So, I would say this contrast really defined perhaps like life choices and who I chose to become and just perspective and textures of life, right? And the other interesting thing is that both were British colonies. And so, from identity perspective, as you know how third culture kids are,
Yeah.
it's like, what is going on?
How connected were you to your Pakistani roots while growing up?
So, quite connected because my parents are from a village in Punjab. We used to go back every year. I would say we were forced to go
Because
back
that's the holiday
every year. That
yeah.
was the
Yeah.
holiday. And that was, the inculcation of speaking Punjabi, of doing very rural Pakistan stuff. So, I didn't grow up with that privileged Pakistani city flavor. I grew up like with that very rural Punjab in the 70s and 80s experience.
So there were two extremes. One was the rural Punjab,
Yeah.
rural Pakistan, and the second one was Hong
Hong
Kong,
Kong.
first world country,
Yeah.
progressive, no interference of
Mindfuck,
anything.
basically,
Yes, yeah.
right? Yeah, so, but a great mindfuck, I think, because when I think about my choices, and all of us have regrets, and we've done some stuff well, and some stuff we regret. But when I look at my upside, the things I got right, I don't think I would have been that person unless I was that grounded in let's say my heritage culture, because that added the layers of perspective and understanding humanity, right? Like, these are my people, and why am I so different? Why is everything such a contradiction? So I think going through this process, yeah, at least if not makes you smart, brings a different element of thinking into who you are, what your
Especially
choice
when
is.
you're living in a country, maybe people, your friends or your colleagues later on, they didn't understand exactly where you were coming from because
That's
you had the
right.
taste of both the worlds.
Yeah. So I never fit anywhere.
Okay.
In contrast, in Hong Kong, I went to very elite British schools, and like my brothers and I were three of the five brown people in a white school.
Oh, talk about
So-
being in minority.
So misfits, right?
Yeah.
Misfit here, misfit there. We went to UK to see relatives, which is our home country. Like, we're citizens of Britain. No connection to Britain,
Of course, yeah.
right? And we met like our relatives from there, and it was like, who the fuck are these people? It was like, all right, so who am I? And I think that was a good crisis, because you kind of strip. Well, I don't know if you do, but what I did is I have to strip all of these different layers. And this actually happened when I got to New York City.
Okay.
That's a space where I felt, who am I really? Because I feel like this is a city I could, I can separate what I've inherited and choose who I choose to be. So I think that existential crisis kind of led to, okay, I'm purging some of the Pakistani stuff. I'm purging some of the Hong Kong stuff. I'm purging some of the British colonial constructs I have, and rebirthing myself.
And when did that happen? The New York move was
Kind
when?
of
Like,
in
how old were
my
you?
Yeah,
At
in
what
my
point of your life?
30s.
In your 30s. So
Yeah,
you were done with uni.
I was
That was your
done with
career life.
uni.
Okay.
Yeah, I was done with uni. But I guess, that's the point of evolution. You never stop changing. But in retrospect, that was a big shift for me in terms of the person I am today and chose to become. Because at that point, I felt like I was consciously now choosing instead of just having inherited all of these influences and heritage and roots and culture and, blah, blah, blah. Kind of stepped out of my skin and said, this is the woman I think I am.
And okay, we'll get to the topic of why you're here. But okay,
Yeah.
since you brought that you moved to New York, that was post 9/11.
That was just before 9/11.
Okay.
So I have experience of just pre
And
9/11, 9/11, and post 9/11.
okay, so how was that experience being a brown person? Because at that time Americans couldn't differentiate if you
Yeah,
were Middle Eastern, if you were Arab, if you were Indian.
that's right.
Yeah, even Sikhs were getting all the hate because they had a beard and a turban. So how was that experience for you?
I think, it was defining, it was life changing. Um, It wasn't personal though to me. It didn't feel personal. So I was going to Columbia University at that time doing my master's, and I didn't feel victimized per se, but the sense of aggression towards brown people was palpable, you know. And this is like it was blanket because this is America, and America is not smart enough to differentiate between ethnicities, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have the texture and the it's not a world facing country, right?
Even
They
today, there.
even today. And so, they always have a narrative, and that's a narrative they believe. Or, like, it's very much a country rooted in propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is even back then felt very communist, as in, wow, I mean, a lot of platforms are just a mouthpiece for what the agenda is. So, I mean, that is much more extreme today, but I could see the roots of that aspect of American culture even back then. But for me personally, I would say, in fact, I had quite a contradictory experience to many people because I was in New York City. I actually had neighbors and I kind of lived in a Jewish neighborhood, and we would never interact. But it's the first time they came to my apartment and said, I hope you're okay and you don't feel a sense of threat, but please let us know if there's something we can do. So it was very, it was the opposite of what people were experiencing.
I've never heard that
Yeah.
this happened. Do you think you being a woman and probably you were staying alone at the
No,
time? Okay.
I was married at that time, but I think it was a very New York City experience.
Okay.
A very midtown New York City
Okay.
experience, right?
Okay, because from what we know, it was all just hate, hate, hate. towards brown people after 9/11.
Yeah.
But okay, that's that's a
But
good
so
thing to know. Yeah.
my husband at that time, he had a totally different
And I
experience,
was gonna ask that,
right?
like, how
And
was his?
so he had that quintessential middle age Muslim man experience. And he was working for a Jewish startup. He was the only Muslim man. And I don't think he felt it from the organization per se. But like I said, it was palpable. And he could, I think he felt a sense that he was A, not welcome here, and B, didn't see a future for himself. Like the American dream was
Yeah,
gone.
it was just bad timing.
Yeah, it was bad timing. But having said that, a lot of people stayed and just, went through the cycles that happen after such a shift. But I mean, 9/11 has permanently changed
Change
the
the
world,
world we live in. Yeah, no
right?
doubt about that.
And
Yeah.
and brought us here
Yeah.
today,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay, so after New York, you were there for a long
Yeah, I
time.
was in
How?
New York for 5 years. So I grew up in Hong Kong. I spent most of my life there. I met my husband there. We moved to Singapore. We moved to New York. After New York, we moved to London. And then after London, and that's when 9/11 had happened. I think a lot of Muslims at that time collectively were either sending money back home or had this kind of reverse flow, of going back to their countries and bringing capital and ideas back home. So he chose to come back to Pakistan. I had never grown up
Yeah.
in Pakistan. So this was, Pakistan was always a country I visited
Yeah. That also the rural side of
and
it.
a
Yeah.
village. And so this city life of Pakistan was a culture shock for me
I can
too,
imagine. Yeah.
Um, and I, there was a lot of struggles there, let's just say.
Any startup there? Did you
No,
no? Okay.
I didn't have any startup there, but I would say I had great professional experiences there. I met with some great professionals, and I will say this, that time I had in Pakistan shifted my own narrative about Pakistan, because I think I had a very colonialist narrative about Pakistan, which is, kind of black and white, and shit works and doesn't work and this and that, and a very simplistic view of a very complex country. So the amazing thing about my consulting work in Pakistan, so I was consulting for the U.S. government to Pakistan
In Islamabad, I
in
assume.
Islamabad.
Okay.
So this was a nationwide private sector program that we were implementing. I got to see a lot of Pakistan for the first time. So it's the first time I also understood the complexity. There's 4 provinces, there's a diversity of people within Pakistan and a diversity of thinking and cultures. And, there's all these subtexts and subcultures and like a lot of amazing people, which I did not expect to meet.
So the perspective changed for the good.
Absolutely.
But you were staying in
Absolutely.
Islamabad. You know what they say about Islamabad?
What's
That
that?
Islamabad is 20 kilometers away from Pakistan,
Yeah.
right? Because
But
things
that's
are
what
a
I'm
bit different.
saying. I went to small villages in Sindh, to do surveys and evaluations and assessments. And I was like, uh, uh, a lot of people say this about Muslim communities, how hospitable they are. So I think that kind of heritage we're used to. We're used to that level of hospitality. But I think this was just so much deeper, a connection to, let's say, a province which I have no context of, and I show up being me. I always stood out in Pakistan. In Pakistan, people ask me if I'm from Bollywood, and
Okay.
I'm like, come on, guys, I'm from here. Like,
Yeah.
I'm you. So it's always been a matter of sticking out. Um, and even though I stood out, I was, always received warmly, and the level of threats we think we face in Pakistan don't really exist. I never faced them. Never. I have never come across. Well, I could dial that back. On a national level, when the bombings were, there was like a spate of
Yeah.
terrorists kind of. Yeah, that
The
I
Afghan
faced,
war and all
but that
around that.
was a national, something the nation was going through, and so we all felt it. Um, and that was a consequence of the government supporting the U.S. But personally, my own self, no, I never, it was like such a amazing professional experience. I have to say that. Like that's the time where I came back with the narrative. The best professionals I have worked with in my whole global experience are Pakistanis.
Okay.
Yeah, I did not expect that.
But do you think, okay, it's way off topic why we're here, but since we
Yeah.
are talking, the an average Pakistani woman would beg to differ with this, that the safety, like I don't think that a woman alone, okay, that's true all over the world, like cannot walk alone without being harassed.
100%. Like, I'm talking about a
The
very,
professional life, only professional life you're talking about, or in general, like living in Islam. And as I said, Islamabad is one of the most progressive cities of the country, so things would
yeah.
be
I
different.
would say, I would say there were two compartments here. One is just being an elite in
Yeah.
Pakistan puts you in a separate category
Yes, yes.
of safety,
Yeah.
right? And so your binding constraints are
Hmm.
different whether you're a man or a woman. As a man, you have all the
Yeah, you
privilege.
rule
It's
that
default
place
setting, right? But as a woman of privilege in Pakistan, I had some privilege compared to
in average. Yeah.
99% of women. That was one compartment. The other compartment was I was working in a very privileged position.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of protection around me. So these two, I have to say, my experience was in these two bubbles, which is not representative of a typical Pakistani woman. Having said that, I have grown up in my village in Punjab as a typical overseas Pakistani and have felt the same. Like, I was connected to my grandparents, my 2,500 cousins, the
Yeah.
whole welcome committee
Yes, yes.
that used to come see us. Like, what a amazing experience. I mean, I have experienced genuine love, I would say, exclusively from Pakistan.
Okay, that's great to
Yeah.
know. Okay, so let's fast forward
Yeah,
now.
sorry, that
No,
went
no,
in a
it's
different
yeah.
direction.
So let's fast forward to how you ended up here
Yeah.
and how you started your the Airbnb thing.
So,
Yeah.
so, so my career history has been in academia. That's a majority
Sorry,
of
I
my
didn't ask you.
experience.
What did you do at Columbia?
Yeah, so I did a master's in international relations.
Okay.
But at that time, I was working with academia already.
Okay.
So I was co-authoring books on business
Oh,
transformation,
great.
on technology, on how technology systems will change the world. I kind of wrote about what's happening today.
You can name a few of the books you co-authored for
Yeah.
people.
Yep. So one of them is managing e-business transformation.
Okay.
My perspective was always Asia. So I was a Asia
All
specialist.
right.
Yeah. One of them was the first book I was a case study writer on, was a book of case studies on companies doing business in Asia. And this was, this was really kind of a breakthrough book in the sense up to the 90s, all the educational perspective was Western. All the business
Yeah.
cases we knew were Western cases. So I would say the professor I worked with from Columbia, um, we constructed this book of case studies, which was one of its kind, talking about businesses in Asia. And
Okay.
we're talking about across Asia. So we're talking about Burma, Singapore, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Indonesia, Hong Kong, Japan. I mean, there was a wealth of
Yeah.
business knowledge there, untapped,
Which no one knew about.
right? So that was really kind of my privilege and entry into academia. So I was back in the day, they were actually, universities were funding primary research as they should,
Uh,
not sponsored shit, and actually asking you to go out. That was my job, to go out and figure out what are the collective business challenges of executives doing business in Asia. Like, what a privilege,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
What a
yeah.
privilege to do this, like as your first job out of college.
College, yeah.
And so I was, my professor mentored me to be a business case writer, to interview business executives, and how to connect data points to see patterns of, challenges that Asia faces, patterns of issues Asia faces. At the same time, what is the fragmentation within Asia? What is the flavor of each Asian country? So, like, yeah, I would say just such a excellent professional experience. So that's
Okay.
how I got into academia. I was really a great mentor from Columbia Business School. That kind of put me on the path to study at Columbia. I went on to write a lot more business cases. So, I had this career in academia, which was very conscious, I have to say, because I was kind of revolting against Hong Kong's very capitalist banking, finance society, because that's what I grew up with. My brothers were all in finance, my friends were all in finance.
Yeah.
Some of the men I dated were in finance. Nobody did anything different.
They don't like change in Hong Kong. From what I in my because I have a friend he's from Hong Kong. He's Hong Kong citizen,
Yeah,
and he's into you know stock markets and banking and all. And now he's thinking of, or he's trying to bring Islamic banking into Hong Kong. So I talk to him on
yeah,
regular basis, and the problems he tells me he's facing with the government, and especially because from Beijing, because it's
yeah.
still now it's controlled by that. It's not, from what I can see, it's not easy to bring change into Hong Kong for some some reason.
Hong Kong, so I'll give you my perspective, which is pre-China
Yeah, okay.
takeover,
Yeah.
because pre-China takeover Hong Kong and post-China takeover Hong Kong are two completely different
Yeah.
animals, you know. But I would say what you're saying rings true. And this is kind of connected to an Asian factor. Because we're a community driven society, our propensity is towards homogenous thinking. We are not free thinkers. This influences us, and I've seen this in business too. And so what you're saying kind of connects to the experience and the patterns I was seeing, that yes, we do bring change. But one of the big things, big findings was there's no big brands out of Asia at that time which were internationally known. I mean, even though there was Hello Kitty, Yakult, Sony was, but Japan apart, all of these very, pretty amazing local brands didn't have any international exposure. So, I mean, we went into digging why is this? Why is Asia? Um, why don't its brands export well
Yeah.
internationally? And it came back to this: what is it about Asia that makes it different from North America? And so being a homogenous society is one of the elements which influences us, especially Southeast Asian society. Now, when you come to South Asia, we're all over the place, right? I mean, we don't have SOPs, right? We don't. People ask us to stand in a line, and we're going to be on. We don't listen to nobody.
Yes.
We're our own bosses, right?
That is
and
true.
so, in my village, our cleaner had no issues coming up to me and telling me what he thought of what I was wearing,
Wow,
how good
okay.
I look. Like I'm talking boss mentality.
Yeah.
And so, like, I've really experienced boss mentality in Pakistan in a big way. They don't take shit from anyone, and it doesn't matter, like, whether you're elite or you're the sweeper. They're gonna tell you what they think, and that's quite different from Hong Kong. Hong Kong is very much about saving face and not being embarrassed. And the Pakistani side of me is like, bring it on, man. Like, let
Yeah.
me dig this. Like, let me push this knife a little further
Yeah.
and see how much you're gonna bleed.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, where were we?
How you ended up here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So academia, then I did this, consulting gig, I would say, at a diplomatic level in Pakistan, which was a super unique experience. But that experience, I think, shook me because it's not normal to work for the US government in Pakistan and represent US interests in Pakistan. That, taught me also a lot about how dishonest and hypocritical US can be, and actually
Very.
how honest Pakistan was about a lot of conspiracy theories they were thinking were true. I can confirm were true.
Okay, that's a separate podcast.
That's a separate podcast. What I'm saying is that kind of experience, I think, takes you to a place where when you exit it, you kind of, I needed some time out because, like, that was intense, right? And Pakistan was going through its own inner turmoil at that time.
It still is.
It still is, but the nature has shifted. At that time, the nature was threat from internal
Yes.
terrorism, right? So it was heavy. After that heavy experience, I just needed to get out. That's how I came to Malaysia. And that is the first time I heard about Airbnb.
So you came to the right place because this is laid back, chilled out.
I
place.
know, exactly.
That's
why I
one of the
picked it.
reasons I'm here as well.
100%. That's why I picked this place. And when I came here, I heard about Airbnb, and that brings us to the topic I
Yes,
think
okay.
we were originally trying to get to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you heard about Airbnb, you had no idea what it is,
I had no
how it
idea.
works. It's completely different than what you've done in your career life.
Completely
Yeah,
different.
it's my house. A stranger comes and stays, and
Yep.
yeah, They pay me money, right? That's
Absolutely.
so. How did you end up with Airbnb?
So it was a very organic experience.
What year was it?
This is 2012.
Okay, so
Yeah.
a while ago.
So in 2012, I ended up in KL with my two kids, and basically made a break from Pakistan and said, I am going to a country where I'm anonymous
No, yeah, okay.
and I'm nobody, and we will see.
Uh-huh.
You know, the path shall emerge type of thing. I came here with my two boys, and our family had a few properties here because when we were living in Hong Kong, this was kind of our sanctuary, and we used to
Okay.
pass through. So we had 2, 3 apartments, our family collectively
In KL.
in KL. And so when I heard about Airbnb and we have 2, 3 apartments, I was like, hey, you know, I see maybe there's some dots
Yeah.
to connect here. Humayun, my 3 properties were the first properties listed on Airbnb KL. So in 2012, if you came to KL and you went on Airbnb, 3 of the 9 properties were mine.
Okay, you
So
one
I'm
third
a first
basically.
market entrant, literally.
Okay, I hope Airbnb was thankful to you for that, or not
Well,
really,
actually, we worked super closely.
because they were new at the time as well.
Super new,
So they
super
didn't
new.
treat you as a number on their Excel sheet,
I
right?
wasn't a stat back
Yes,
then,
yes,
you
yes,
know,
yes, I can-
and I wasn't just a number. Like, I was one of the first people, you know, the test case.
Yeah.
I was the proof of concept. And so I opened these, I first redesigned these apartments to host short-term guests. So that was, you know, a bit of change. Great shift of pace from, you know, the shit I was doing
Yeah,
in
running,
Pakistan.
working for the U.S. government in Pakistan. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, doing interior decoration and actually thinking from a UX perspective, you know, what do I want a customer experience to feel like? How do I personalize this? Very new things for me. Like I am
Zero
not,
experience, right? Zero
Yeah.
experience.
I have zero.
How
And
challenging was that?
actually, it felt super organic. I think, you know, if you had come to me at that, because I'm a thinker, you know, and that's kind of how I've grown up. I intellectualize, maybe over intellectualize things. I'm a logical person. I was a researcher, a writer, so you can connect the dots, right? And none of this adds up to entrepreneurship
Yeah.
at all, at all. And so my journey was super organic, unintended, you know, and it surprised me as well because I would never ever think of myself as an entrepreneur. I still struggle with that. But this journey started, and I think because the Airbnb representative was on the ground and literally living close to me, we met every day to discuss how was your first guest experience? How did the tech work? Like, is the app working well? I was one of the first people to give feedback. I think this part, you know, I faced issues. Well, if they're rating me and you know, can I rate them back because I've had some bad experiences? And so they kept adding elements to the app based on my feedback.
Okay,
You know, it was that.
And
it
any
was-
startup would need it, the voice from both sides, not just customer's point of view.
The cool thing about Airbnb, I would say definitely back then, but the reason why they've become so successful is they listen to their community, you know.
That's the key. Otherwise,
Very actively, not just that, you know, it's good to be a good listener, but they were actively always upgrading elements in the user experience for both sides, for guests and for hosts. but they gave, I think, a lot of support and importance to hosts, which is where I think I gained my confidence because having this, like my go-to Airbnb
Yeah.
guy who would come over and and give one-on-one advice. They were doing photography at that time for the host, so they would come and help you. I didn't have to do that, and
Okay.
also tell you. So it was such a personal experience. Felt very organic. um, I had a very successful experience with my first
How was
Airbnbs.
Airbnb's reception from customers' point of view? Was it
Excellent. Really
in
great.
okay?
Really great. So I
But
think,
initially, you said there were only 9 properties listed
yeah,
in KL.
that's right.
That's and for how long were there only 9 and then exploded? Or
Yeah, so I would say the first 6 months was very slow moving. So the 9 of us in the market got a lot of personalized feedback directly from Airbnb, which was a huge advantage, and we were also giving feedback back.
it was a new concept as well
It
for
was a
customers
new
also.
concept, right?
Because yeah, rather than going to a hotel, you stay in someone's house.
That's right.
Like I have never stayed in Airbnb. Still, I have that
Oh,
thing.
really?
Yeah, that I'm not too comfortable in the back of my head staying in someone
Really?
else's house. But now things have changed. Like when
Yeah.
Airbnb started, it was purely uh, you're renting a room in someone's house while probably they're still living in it, right? But
That's
now
right.
then people started buying properties and
Yep.
just for that purpose.
Well, it was like 6 months into it, it became extremely disruptive because once it started gaining momentum, then all these regulatory
Yeah,
issues
that
came
was my
into
next
play.
question. Yeah.
Oh my God! Like we had never fathomed the level of the complexity of issues we would face and what we were up against, because you have to realize now this was this successful disruptor
Yeah, to the hotel industry, which is a
to
multi-billion-dollar
which
industry.
and it's like in any context, like you can take a government, you can take a country, you can take a company, you can take an industry and apply this analogy. When you work against existing interests,
You're gonna face
it's
a
a
lot of shit.
David and
Yes, yes,
Goliath
yeah.
kind of story, and this is how it felt because suddenly, you know, um, my building's management was asking, "Who are these guests coming? Why do you have such frequent guests?" And then they looked into their house rules and say, "Do our house rules permit this?" Which is when I think very smart move, became chairwoman of the JMB and changed the house rules.
Oh, for your condo.
Yeah, for
Okay.
my condo. And this was, kind of my own learning experience, that I have to become, instead of going to the JMB and explaining, I owned a property, we owned properties in that building, so I could do that. I became secretary
Okay.
in that JMB and started influencing the house rules. Now, when other people heard about this model I was doing, and they would come for the AGM, they're like, "Yeah, we want to do that because the upside at that time compared to rentals you were getting was almost 150%."
Oh, that's
Right? I
a
mean,
big number.
it doesn't matter what the rules are.
Yeah,
That is such compelling economic value
for the condo. Yeah.
for owners,
Yes, yes, exactly.
right? Or even tenants. So what I started doing is I started leasing properties from like very dilapidated kind of landlords and upgrading them. So my pitch to them was same rental rate, but I'm going to upgrade and add value. So in a year's time, when you come and see your property, it's going to be a
Yeah.
completely
And you can
different
rent it
place.
out for
But
more.
and so the rental contracts I constructed with them changed from the standard tenancy because I was bringing in all these clauses to
Yeah.
protect myself as a subletter and as a person doing business.
Because in a normal contract, I'm not allowed to sublet my place, right? So
Absolutely.
so how long? Okay, we'll pause here for a second. So how long did it run well till all these problems started? We'll start with the
Yeah.
regulatory authorities.
I would say that it was it was a slow build-up of this chokehold of regulatory reforms, but 3 years. So we had a good 3 years. I can tell you, in 3 years, I built up. At the peak, I had about 28. I was managing 28 properties in central KL.
Oh, that's a big number. And
Yeah,
there was a term for what do they call it?
Superhost.
Superhost. Okay, that's like
So, but
best of the best.
Superhost was not just a person who managed lots of properties. Superhost was a person who was consistently getting 5-star reviews.
Okay.
So I became a superhost because my multiple properties were getting 5-star reviews. But actually, it was the difference between me and regular hosts is actually a very fine line. The thing I did that other hosts didn't do is I responded in a crisis situation. I responded personally. Otherwise, I had SOPs. So I had built SOPs. I was running autopilot. But if there was a crisis, if a customer was unhappy, if a visitor did not like the property or had an issue, I showed up. I
It
showed
matters.
up
It matters.
in 10 minutes and I always problem solved. This gave me a huge edge,
Yeah. Good.
a huge edge because you get reviews and people said, you're coming to a new country. There are much better properties than Shamzas. But if you have an issue, she's
She'll
the
be there.
person you want to stay with. And there was earthquake, like the planes disappeared. Remember
Oh,
all that
okay.
shit that happened? I mean, like, yeah, like there was lots of different
Yeah.
macro level and micro level panic moments. I had police do a raid of our condo because they were trying to check how many people are staying in an apartment with the guise of fire. What's it called?
Bomba.
Like
Okay.
la bomb. But that was my fight with management at that time, and so they used this, like, they were trying to subvert me,
Yeah.
right?
So
And
they were
so
never on your side. They never liked it. I think
huge
even today.
issue, huge issue. Basically, there were two polarized camps. People who want to do short-term rentals and gain value because, and our argument was it builds the value of the whole building if you guys agree to do it systematically with proper frameworks and with management.
It works. Yeah.
But yeah, it
So
was,
it's 3 years now. You have these issues with the condo management.
yeah,
You're fighting them constantly, but the business is good, right?
business was good, but started becoming so saturated that my margins were shrinking
Because there
dramatically.
was more supply than demand.
Yeah,
Okay. But
there
what
was.
was the first big fuck up, like from whoever? What was the first big problem you faced?
I think it's regulatory because then they
What was their issue? What did they say?
yeah,
Did they shut you
yeah,
down?
they said you either they at that time, this was 2016. What is that department called which manages the JMB's COB? It's called Committee of Buildings.
Okay.
Committee of Buildings was receiving like massive complaints from residents,
Saying that.
which, yeah, who live there as well, saying there's like people coming in and using the facilities, and you have much more utilization of facilities than we do. So it was really that clash at a regulatory level where we were taken to court.
The hosts,
Yeah,
okay.
the hopes, right? And then it became a court issue because it was like, all right, it came down to house rules, but it really came down to what the Committee of Buildings would interpret. And so we're like waiting. The good thing about Malaysia is everything takes months. So it's like you always have a few months before like everything implodes,
yeah.
right? And so those few months of planning always give you a plan B. And so we were coming up. We were also at that time started talking with Airbnb. They started lawyering up, in a lot of cities. You must have heard in San Francisco, in Singapore, this, that. Uh, Malaysia's experience was very different because they came to an agreement that they will just tax the host. And the tax was built into Airbnb's app.
Okay.
So there was a 20% additional, I forget, it was 15 or 20% additional
Which
tax,
they were charging the customer.
which we charged then the customer.
And
They charged the host, and the
Okay.
host, like, we could choose. We could absorb that tax or pass it to the
but
customer.
20%, it's a big.
It's a lot.
To
But
absorb.
so this additional tax and the oversupply of housing.
This 20% was only in Malaysia, or was
It was.
Airbnb?
It was a. I'm giving you now a Malaysia specific.
And the reason for them to implement this 20% was because of
Because the hotels put pressure on them. Like, if we're actually going to compete with these guys, like we do all this stuff,
Because
pay taxes,
Okay. And because hotels also pay some extra
That's
16% tourism tax and
That's
some
right.
other. Yeah.
So we had to pay the tourism tax and
Because it was a business you were running.
short-term
Okay. Yeah.
rental tax, I think it was.
Oh, that's
called,
a new one. Okay.
right? So these shifts really put pressures, so much pressure on margins that I came to a point where I was like, I either have to institutionalize my business and go for economies of scale, or I need to exit. So
Sorry.
Yeah.
What were the margins when you started?
Yeah.
And what were the margins at this point now?
margins when I started were 80 to 95%.
When you had
The three properties, yeah.
85%. No wonder you started leasing
Yeah,
apartments.
then I was like,
Yeah,
then my
it's
brain was working
like
overtime.
ching-ching,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was bawling.
At
And
85%, who wouldn't?
but I didn't even understand the business context. I just knew, like,
Money's
I'm
coming in.
bawling.
Okay.
I'm bawling. Like, I made it. I think I made it. And I had no business context. Like I told you, I didn't have a business brain. So I think I probably could do a better job. I didn't think of efficiencies in a business way.
So you're not
although
spending, because you didn't have to spend on marketing or anything on Airbnb.
I
It's
didn't.
just
I just
if I
had to use
search
the app.
for Airbnb
Yep.
or like 2 rooms, and it will
That's
show up
right.
in the app. Okay.
That's right.
So that's why your margins were super high, and
Super
there were
high.
not many apartments on Airbnb in Malaysia.
No.
And then when it was too many, the margins dropped too.
Yeah, the margins dropped because competition became almost perfect competition, right?
Like any
we
business.
faced perfect competition where the actually prices became so competitive that they became standardized. You had no maneuver in terms of
Even if you
pricing.
increase by a few ringgits, people would say, "Nah, I'll go there."
I have 50 other choices.
Yeah.
That's part one. And then the app itself came up with this dynamic pricing model, which I think really fucked hosts. Because dynamic pricing was that the app will determine the value of one night at your property. So one night of my property when I started was $90, right?
Okay. For a room, for one room.
For an apartment.
For an apartment,
Let's say for a studio apartment.
All right.
Right. By 2017, one night for the same studio, as per dynamic pricing, was between $28 to $38.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
And considering there were another million apartments,
That's right.
properties listed.
Yep.
And how much was Airbnb taking? Like, what is their
Yeah, their
cut?
commission was, I think initially it started as 12%, but came down to, as they gained volumes, came down to 8%.
Yeah, but at that low
It
price,
was 6 to 8%.
okay.
Yeah. So, like, our costs were the 20% plus the tourism with tax, which was 2% or something, service fees, Airbnb fees, perfect competition, and dynamic pricing, which was punishing hosts who weren't following dynamic pricing. I don't know what the algorithm on that is, but it definitely felt like a punishment because I listed my properties higher than what the dynamic pricing was suggested, and I was struggling
No one
to
was
keep
taking
my
it.
occupancy above 60%.
And what percentage you had to be to make some money?
So break even for me had become 70%.
So you were losing money
Yeah.
basically.
So at some point in 2018, I was losing money by being in business.
Okay, so you had a good run
I
for
had a
five,
great
six
run.
years.
I had a great run for 3 years. I had an excellent run for 3 years. I had a good run for 2 years. I was breaking even for 3 years after that, and then it went to shit.
Okay, so it's 2018 now,
Yeah.
just before the lockdowns and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And you were at that point you had already decided I'm not good.
No.
Okay.
Actually, I went the other way. This is interesting because the Airbnb representative who I work closely with, by the way, so I was invited to a Superhost conference in Paris where the bombing happened, the big terrorist bombing
Oh,
happened. So Airbnb and I have been through a lot together, whether they know this or not. I mean, some of them know this because we became friends like family. Um, so 2018, I said to this friend of mine, why don't you quit Airbnb, come to my business, let's sell this to the big developers. You know, they can pitch this model to people who are going to buy their properties and guarantee rentals. He's like, this is a great idea.
so you, what was your idea again? You wanted to
So go
do,
to the developers
uh-huh.
whose apartment buildings are coming up, pitch the short term rental model to the people who are buying from them,
Okay.
right? So work with the developers, pitch a guaranteed rental or a profit share model. You had two choices. We came up with two choices. You either let us manage your property and take a percentage, or you let us manage your property and take a profit share. So we came up with some calculation. So this ex Airbnb guy joined me.
Okay.
We went pitching to developers and existing buildings, which we knew had 30 to 40% excess capacity of apartments.
And at that time you were still with Airbnb, you were still hosting,
Yes, I
or
was
okay,
still hosting.
but
But
you weren't.
I had checked out of that retail model. I knew that if this is going to work, it has to be upscale. You know, it has to be, I have to go for volume. I have to take over buildings.
Yeah, and that's very capital.
Yeah, that's where I'm going to capitalize, and that's where the forward integration is.
Okay. So you had your Airbnb thing, which you weren't like 100%,
It
in your
was it
mind.
was going downhill
Yeah, and
rapidly.
now you came up with this new idea.
Yeah, I
You
came up
got
with
this
this new
guy
idea.
from Airbnb.
I was first again because I had so much experience in this business. I could see that I either need to move forward or exit. These are my two choices. I had no reason not to give this a shot,
Okay.
but it completely failed.
Why? What happened?
Where do I start? I think the crux of this business model working was the JMBs of buildings. And the JMBs of buildings are representative of building interests and they are representative of regulatory law. Now, this is where you face the friction, right? You can, so my approach was all of these problems can be solved. Let us manage guests in a way which brings more management fees to you due to the higher usage, um, which you can contribute to upgrading your building. Um, and let's work with you to change the house rules and work with COB to change this ecosystem. So, we were ready to lawyer up and really make a push for change in regulation and go customize solutions to each JMB. This is how I pitched to about 15 different buildings.
But they were the management fee they get irrespectively, anyways, right?
We were willing to pay more for the units which were doing short-term rentals. So if you get $3 per square foot for an average apartment, we're willing to pay $7.
And so that was like more than double. And
That's right.
They didn't buy that.
They resisted that.
Or do you know the reason why?
I don't know. I can't say, but I would say that couple of dynamics, right? Malaysia, which is actually contradictory. There was such an supply of apartments. I thought it was really logical for me to go and say, you have excess capacity. I'm going to pay your management more. Let me talk to the owners. You put me in touch with them. Let's have a meeting and let's discuss this profit share model. I thought, like, no brainer.
So it was a mistake from your part, knowing that there's oversupply of these apartments.
That was true. So that hypothesis was true. What was not true is owners trusting Airbnb. Airbnb had a huge image issue for some reason, even though, like, statistically speaking, the incidents which happened at Airbnb, even for me, were negligible. But it was a huge image problem.
Did they ever voice their concerns
Yes.
to you?
There
What's
are
the biggest
buildings,
issue?
as you know, in Kuala Lumpur, across Kuala Lumpur, where as soon as you enter the gate, there's a big sign saying no Airbnb.
Yeah, even today.
Right? And so that trend, that polarization started at that time. It was so hard to fight against this, the way it was looking at that time. I spent a year, 15 months talking to 15 buildings. No, this would have taken years and years of my life just trying to educate people.
And do you think this problem was exclusive to KL or Malaysia, or around the region they were facing the same?
Yeah,
Thailand,
the
Indonesia.
image issues were the same, but the market dynamics of your local market have a huge influence on your outcomes. So let's compare to Singapore. Singapore, for example, had lock, stock, and barrel said no Airbnb.
Yeah.
Anyway, they shut down.
That's
They
Singapore.
clamped down, right?
Yeah, they don't fuck around.
They don't fuck around.
They don't like it. It's a no.
It's black and white.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. Malaysia came up with this hybrid model. If you keep it on the DL, we won't.
Yeah,
We'll look the
I
other
know
way.
in my startup how this works. Yeah,
Right?
okay,
And
yeah.
you must have faced these similar experiences. But when it comes to regulatory and institutional, that I just felt like there's only so much I can fight. I tried to get other Superhosts on the bandwagon, but I felt like, I don't know, I felt like I was ahead of my time. They couldn't see what I was seeing, even though it seemed quite obvious. And in that sense, Malaysia moves very slowly.
And at any point, did you think about doing the same thing what you were doing in Hong Kong, for example,
Yeah.
or Thailand, or Bangkok,
I did.
and you didn't execute it?
I thought about Hong Kong because my
Yeah, that was
home
home, yeah.
country, but the cost of entry into Hong Kong, you know what
Yeah,
rentals are like in
it's
Hong Kong. Like
insane.
I would have to come up with a lot of initial investment. And if I'm going to come up with, let's say, $500,000 in initial investment, is this the business I want to do? Like, it's a lot of like check in and check outs, right? It's a lot of key management, it's a lot of working with building. And I wasn't sure of Hong Kong margins because I don't think they were good. And interestingly enough, Hong Kong Airbnb, there was a gap, had terrible reviews.
The reason
I don't know the reason,
the
but I can
hosts weren't doing their
imagine
job.
houses are small, people are busy. This is a secondary income for them. They must have had issues with the Chinese security guard and must
Yeah,
have
yeah.
told them to fuck off, like all that kind of stuff. So there was a gap, but yeah, the thought of penetrating and going through all that for like, I don't know, 5%, not
That
worth
stopped
it.
you. Okay, so now it's still 2018, or
This
we are
is
into
now we're talking
2019.
about 2019, where I am, and my partner was pretty convinced, and he's an entrepreneur, and so he was like, Shamza,
It's time.
we got to moonwalk out
Uh-huh.
of this. And he moonwalked out. I still pushed because there was, the Star building behind
Yeah, yeah.
KLCC, Star and Diamond. I was still talking to them, and I was like, if I convert these guys, like this is my signal to keep going. We were in talks for 6 to 8 months, and finally, and then 2020 happened, and the sentiment was changing, and I was like, this is my cue.
Yeah, 2020 was, even if you did succeed getting the
Yeah,
star, you would have
I
to,
would have
yeah,
failed.
yeah,
I
because
would have felt. So, I mean, God's intervention, like maybe I was saved, right, in a sense, because if I had started something, I would have lost heavily,
everything.
heavily.
And the it was gradual. The when from 28 properties, it's not like one day you were not hosting any. It was, how gradual was it?
Yeah, I would say from 2017, I was,
Decreasing.
yeah,
Okay.
I was decreasing the amount of properties that the ones, the kind of dogs, right, in the BCG matrix, the dogs I was letting go, like 7-8%, not even 7-8, 5-6%, let it go, not worth the work,
Yeah.
right? So I was letting those property goes, just keeping my star property. But I think by the time it was 2019, 2020, the stars became dogs too,
Of
you
course. Yeah.
know? And it was like, what am I doing this for, you know?
Do you remember the day you said,
Yeah,
fuck, I'm done? Like,
yeah. It was July 2019 because my sons were coming to visit me. I was like, I'd rather spend time,
how
you
was
know.
the next day when you woke up and you had nothing to host?
Yeah,
How?
liberating.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like extremely liberating. It's like everything, life is a bunch of cycles, right? Whenever you finish a cycle, I think the smart thing to do is to reflect, because whether you succeed or whether you fail, it's all about how you take those lessons going forward. I don't think like I considered it a failure, so I didn't take that failure well. Having said that, at the same time, I felt so liberated from this burden of trying to make something work that wasn't working for many years. And I was seeing the signs, but I couldn't let go because I think our ego comes into play, and like nobody wants to lose,
Yeah.
nobody wants to lose.
Yeah. So you said when it all stopped, it was liberating for you rather than you getting into that mode. Fuck, what happened? Is it because it wasn't your fault? It's not like you fucked up. It's because the condo management was being a pain in the ass, these additional
I'll tell
taxes and all
you
that.
actually what it was. I did a consulting gig while I was hosting in 2016. Uh, I shall not name the big in a large academic institution which has a business school in KL. That experience was so damaging to me professionally. It burnt me, and it was the first time in my life I'd actually failed in my career. I took that failure terribly. It took me a year and a half to recover from it. I was extremely damaged by it. And by the time I recovered from that, I was thinking, how does one fail successfully?
Okay.
Which now fast forward 2019 happened. I think I had learned a lot of lessons from how bad that went for me, you know, and I had said, I can take lessons from this. There's no such thing as failing. There's only how I move forward. And so I think that very dramatic failure really facilitated this failing successful mode. It was the beginning of how I started looking at failure and how I think now I come back from failure, or my bounce back is much quicker. My bounce back was a year and fucking half. That was like 15 months of no productivity, just mental torture,
It's the
to like 2019. A week, 10 days, think about it, process it. All right, what's next? Versus now. Like now, my bounce back is, I think it's quite decent. I'd say a day and a half. I can wake up the next day and say that was shitty, really sucked. Today's another day.
okay. Well, that's great. Not a lot of people can say that in a day and a half they can, I wouldn't say overcome their failure, but ready to move on to the
Yeah,
next.
but trust me, it has been so much inner work. This is no, this is not for the weak. You really have to. Oh, I should say, the type of person I am, intellectualizing things, rationalizing things, overthinking things. I had to do all this inner work, which then you get into imposter syndrome, self doubt, like fear of failure, this, Asian immigrant expectations to be the best at, so many things come into play. I, yeah, it was this bounce back I talk about now was with a lot of tears, a lot of pain, a lot of reflection, a lot of time investment into becoming this person now. Really, I can't tell you how much work it's been. And we're talking about 2016. It's 20, that's 8 years of daily work.
Yeah, and the hospitality industry, it's no, there's
No,
no
but
no
I'm
breaks.
talking about failing. I'm talking about from that point, like my big failure. Where fast forward, it's been 8 years of daily work, and it's still daily work. Like, you know, um, it's a lot of investment to be able to become a person that fails well, especially if you're from Asia. And then especially if you're, you know, Pakistani immigrant roots, like went to an elite school, went to Columbia, all these expectations, imposter syndrome, I mean, you name it,
Yeah.
right? Like,
So if we just talk about the Airbnb experience, the highs and the lows, what was your biggest takeaway from that?
take a risk. Take a risk, trust yourself. um, I had never thought of myself as an
Do
entrepreneur.
you have that has that changed or
Yes, it's made me think. I had a very different relationship to money because I grew up in an ostentatious society which spends 80% of its money on a Gucci bag, just to go to work. Like that's the model of society I grew up in. I was rebelling against that. I was saying I don't like money. I'm not. I actually, as a person, I'm not greedy about money. And I want to do legacy shit in life, things which make the world a better place, where my skin is in the game, and I am not an imposter. I'm an authentic person. So all of these things led me to have a very different relationship with money that typically people do. I never wanted to make money. I never knew how to make money. But I was privileged and I went to good school. So I came into positions where there was money. But this was the first time I experienced, like, oh my God, I did this,
Yeah.
I made this. Like, I'm an entrepreneur.
and I can do it? It's
So I would say take a risk, trust your intuition, look at the market gaps for sure. You know, uh, Good business is a problem you see that can be solved and you solve it, right? And I mean, Airbnb was a phenomenal business model. I really think so.
even today. Is it working well today? In I'm talking about here or no? I don't know.
Well, are
I'm
you
totally.
like, I don't know what the numbers are, but if any business is booking 80 million properties a night,
They're doing something right.
they're doing something right.
Okay, so if we take the COVID away, and if you're given the opportunity to do the same thing again, if all the regulatory authorities, all that shit is sorted, would you do it today? Uh,
No,
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 not
because
here, not anywhere else.
no, because now that market is saturated. In a lot of countries, developers have taken over. They've institutionalized businesses. If you go to Dubai, there are so many professional middle players, but also professional developers have, taken in this business model. So it's very, very institutionalized. Unless you have economies of scales, unless you're doing a couple of buildings,
Yeah,
absolutely
with
not worth
one
it.
or two apartments, there's no way you can. Okay, so that's another takeaway that
Yeah,
today that ship has
doesn't.
sailed.
Yeah, that ship has sailed. There might be pockets of cities and places and islands.
And I think in smaller towns, maybe in Europe somewhere,
Maybe,
but
maybe, but
not
I
in big
don't know.
cities. Not
No,
in big cities.
no,
Obviously, you wouldn't do
absolutely
it today.
not. Absolutely not.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's quite. I could feel the whole journey from day one till now.
yeah. You felt my pain.
Yeah.
Are you like me? Like I honestly experienced such joy as an entrepreneur that I have never. I shouldn't say that. A very different joy than to. I mean, I'm very proud of my academic and publishing achievements. Like that's my legacy. But wow, like I never expected to experience this. This kind of, like, dynamic
Yeah.
thinking as an entrepreneur and getting it right, because I am not your cookie cutter entrepreneur profile
Have you taken a risk since then?
as we speak.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, as we speak. I can't say much about it, but I would say this capacity to take these kinds of risks I'm taking today, I mean, has come from a lot of different things. But being that entrepreneur, putting that hat on, being able to tell yourself that you can solve problems and you can do hard shit, and you can do whatever it takes has helped me. I'm like literally in the thick of it now. So we'll see. Maybe this is a podcast for
No,
next
I
year.
hope whatever you're doing now, it doesn't end up that you are back here
Yes.
for that.
A different podcast,
yeah, a different
maybe.
one.
Yeah.
The opposite of 180 degrees
That's
of that.
right.
Okay, so you mentioned you wrote a few books. If they're still available, if you don't mind telling the titles of it, if
Yeah.
I can put the links.
Yeah, I'll
in
share
the-
the links with you.
Okay, and
Yeah.
I'm sure.
So my business case studies are published on Harvard
Okay.
Business Review.
You went to Harvard Business School as
I
well.
actually went to Columbia
Uh-huh.
University, but my strategy cases were published at Harvard Business Review.
That's an achievement and a half for
like
any
that.
academic. Yeah, of course. If I was you, I would brag about it 24/7.
I used to be an arrogant, cocky asshole, and yeah, I have, life teaches you humility, and I'm practicing it. So I'm in this humble era now. Let's see how it goes. Sometimes you need to be an asshole, but I had no reason to be an asshole with you.
I think we all are assholes. Some are big, some are huge, some are very obvious. It shows on their face. Yeah, and we have to be at some point a bit selfish as well. But that's how things are. That's how life is.
We have to adapt and evolve. This is if I take 10 steps back, what I can say to you about who I am today is so many evolutions of who I've been, who I thought I was, who I thought I would be. None of that's true. All I could do in the face of change, and which I give myself credit for, is I change quickly, I adapt relatively well, and I keep looking forward.
Okay.
But that sounds nice on paper. I'm also the chick who looks back, regrets things and says, I should have, I could have.
We all do. I mean,
Yeah.
we all do.
But
That if I did this, maybe things would be different. But it's water under the bridge. There's
Yeah.
nothing we can do about
But
it.
in this era, I'm trying to be stoic and limit that and expand
Move forward.
this.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's a shift that I've noticed within myself, and I like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. You're
Yeah.
happy.
Happiness is elusive. It's a good place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good places will do. Yeah. Okay, so we have to wrap it up.
All right.
Any closing remarks for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, like I said to you, I think, I said take a risk, right? But I would really say connect back to your intuition. I'm starting to recently discover this role that intuition plays for us. Every time I have trusted my intuition, which is backed by, your market knowledge, I would say take that risk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
All
Shamza,
right.
for
Thanks,
being here.
Aman.
It was a pleasure to
It was
talk
so
to
much
you.
fun. I felt like I talked a lot.
No, that's why you're here.
All right.
I wish we could do this for longer, but we have a
No,
time
this
limit.
is good.
Thanks a
This is
lot,
good. No
and see
problem.
you
My
again.
pleasure.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
thank you so much.